I knew this conversation was coming. From the moment I told my father about her, I could sense it. There was a hesitation in his eyes, something he wasn't ready to voice but couldn't hide either. At first he didn't say much. He just listened, observed. But I could tell his mind was already working, forming thoughts, questions, and judgments. His silence spoke volumes, and when he finally spoke, his words hit me with an intensity I wasn't prepared for. "Son, are you sure about this?" It wasn't anger that I heard in his voice, nor disapproval. It was a careful, measured tone. That indicated he was genuinely trying to understand. He wasn't angry, but he was cautious, concerned, and uncertain. "She's older than you," he continued, the words hanging in the air between us, heavier than I imagined they'd be. I wasn't sure what to expect from this moment. I had braced myself for judgment, for words of disapproval. But his next words weren't harsh. They were thoughtful, almost probing, and a part of me understood the weight behind them. Life doesn't always work the way you think it will. You need to think long-term. I could hear the unspoken fears in his words. He was worried about the future. He was worried about how people would perceive us, how society might judge the relationship. He was worried that I might regret my choice one day. But there was more to it than that. I knew my father well enough to understand his hesitation. It wasn't that he didn't like her. It was that he was trying to protect me. And for that I respected him even more. He continued, "She's lived more life than you." He said it as a warning, as if her past experiences would somehow create a gap between us that couldn't be bridged. He didn't fully understand what made her different from everyone else. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that her experiences made her love stronger, more real, deeper than anything I had ever known. It wasn't about age or the number of years she had lived. It was about the depth of understanding, the wisdom she carried with her. And that wisdom was exactly why I chose her. "People will talk," he said after a long silence. "You have to be ready for that." Maybe he was right. Maybe people would talk. Maybe they would whisper, judge, and question why a younger man would choose to be with someone older. But I didn't care. Because love, real love, isn't about making the world comfortable. It's about finding the person who makes you feel at home, and she was home to me. "Does she make you happy?" That was the turning point in the conversation. His voice softened, his expression changed, and I could tell that beneath his concerns, he truly wanted to know. All he wanted was for me to be happy. And that moment, I realized that his hesitation wasn't about her. It was about me. It was about making sure that I wasn't making a mistake, making sure I wasn't rushing into something that might hurt me in the future. "Yes, Dad," I answered without a second thought. "She makes me happier than I have ever been." I could see the relief in his eyes, but I also saw that the concern wasn't gone. He was still processing, still thinking about what this all meant. He sat there for a while, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. I could tell that he was weighing his words carefully, trying to decide what to say next. "Son, I just don't want you making a mistake." His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried a certain weight. A weight that came from a man who had seen more of life than I had, a man who had lived through the ups and downs and knew the difficulties that love could bring. "She's seen more, been through more," he said, his tone serious. "Are you sure she's not leading you somewhere you're not ready to go?" I understood his concern. He wasn't questioning her worth. He wasn't doubting my feelings. He was questioning time. Would I regret this choice years down the line? Would I wake up and realize that the gap between us, our ages, our experiences, the stages of life we were in, was too wide to bridge? But what he didn't understand was that love isn't measured by years. Love is measured by connection, by the bond between two souls that transcends age, experience, or society's expectations. And she was my equal. In every way that mattered, she was my equal. "She can't give you the same future a younger woman could," he said, still trying to understand. I knew what he was getting at. He was thinking about the years ahead, about the future, about family. He was thinking about time, the inevitable changes that come when two people don't start life at the same place. But love doesn't follow a schedule. Love doesn't ask for permission based on age or stage or societal approval. Love chooses you when you least expect it. It finds you in the person you never saw coming, and it doesn't care what the world thinks. I don't care, I said quietly but firmly. Love isn't about making the world comfortable. It's about choosing the person who makes you feel at home. It was true. I had chosen her not because of what she could give me in the future, not because of the promises of tomorrow, but because of what she gave me now. A love that was steady, real, and filled with purpose. A love that made every moment feel like enough, no matter what the years ahead might hold. "Do you love her?" he asked, his voice now softer than before. That was the question I had been waiting for. "Yes," I answered, without hesitation. "More than I can explain." For a moment he didn't speak. He simply studied me, searching for something. Some hint of doubt, some hesitation, some reason to tell me that I was making a mistake, but there was none. I had never been more certain of anything in my life, and I think he knew that. He finally nodded, slowly. "That's all that matters." It wasn't a full acceptance. It wasn't an enthusiastic approval. But it was respect, and in that moment, I knew that he didn't have to understand it completely. He didn't have to agree with me. He just had to see that I did. And that, for now, was enough. "Love is a strange thing, son," he said, his voice carrying a note of wisdom. It wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't fully accepting either. It was the voice of a man who had seen love in all its forms, the easy kind, the complicated kind, the kind that makes no sense to anyone except the two people in it. "I won't pretend I understand why you chose her," he admitted quietly, "but love has a way of finding people in ways we don't always expect." There it was, the closest thing to approval I had gotten from him yet. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was respect, and for that I was grateful. "She's lived more life than you. Does that not worry you?" he asked again. This wasn't the first time he had said something like this, but this time his voice carried a different tone, not out of curiosity, but out of a desire to understand, to see through my eyes, to know what made this love different from anything he had ever known. "No, Dad," I said firmly. "It doesn't worry me. It's one of the things I love about her. She had seen life in a way I hadn't. She had lived through the highs and lows, the struggles, the triumphs. She had learned the lessons that shape a person into someone real. And that was what I loved about her. There was depth to her, a strength that came from years of living a life that had made her who she was." "What about the future?" my father asked again, his voice filled with concern. I knew what he meant. He was thinking about the doubts people would whisper, the questions they would ask. He was thinking about the things people assumed when they saw a younger man with an older woman. But my answer was simple. Love isn't about planning every detail of the future, Dad. It's about knowing who you want to face it with. I wanted to face it with her, not because it was easy, not because it was what was expected, but because in a world full of temporary things, she was the one person I knew would never feel temporary to me. "I see," my father said quietly, as though the weight of my words had finally begun to sink in. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was understanding. Not complete understanding, but enough. Enough for him to see that this wasn't just some fleeting passion. Enough for him to see that my heart had already made its choice. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his fingers pressed together in thought. I could tell that he wasn't just speaking to me anymore. He was speaking to himself, trying to make sense of something that went against everything he had expected for me. "Love isn't supposed to be complicated," he said, his voice steady, but filled with concern. "People usually fall for someone, their age, someone on the same path, someone who fits into life the way they imagined." I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. But love, real love, isn't about what's supposed to happen. It's about what does happen, and sometimes it happens in ways that no one else understands. "She fits me," I said simply. "Maybe not in the way the world expects, but in the way that matters. The words seemed to settle between us. There was no dramatic resolution, no sudden shift in perspective, but something had changed. Slowly, he was beginning to understand. Will she always be enough for you? It was a question I had expected.